Greetings and welcome back. So, sadly, maybe, we're to the end. And what I'm going to do now is, over the course of today, for me, and however much time it takes you, assuming you want to pursue it, I'm going to do a bunch of brief vignettes, each of which has a little point to make, and all of which fit into the overall scope and themes of this course, which is I remind you my biggest objective of all was a to remind us all to not lose our sense of wonder about the natural world that surrounds us, ever. To not take things for granted. That's number one. Number two was to appreciate and to embrace and to marvel at the fact that the human mind has confronted that mysterious world around us and has been able to penetrate the shadows and to illuminate what seemed completely mysterious. Last summer, I had an evening in Oregon, which was the finest 3 hours of looking at the heavens that I've had in my whole life. And during that 3 hours, what I was able to do is to lay on my back and watch the comet that was present in the sky, in the western sky in July 2020. And while I was watching it, I reflected on the fact that, once upon a time that was a mysterious phenomenon that was a portent of things evil and whatever. And now it's something that we understand very well, and we know the orientation of the tail, and we can calculate the orbit, and we can send space probes, and it's kind of just insane what the human mind has accomplished. Okay, so that's the scope of the things that I'm going to try to do. And so my first little vignette, which is very brief, is what I'm going to call On Night Science. And this really has to do with maybe a corollary to the two things that I just mentioned. Both of those had to do with our attitudes about the natural world and our ability to understand the natural world. And night science has to do with our action, if you like. In other words, what actions go with those attitudes. And so the attitude is one of joy, one of a sense of wanting to penetrate the mystery, an attitude of gratitude that one has the opportunity to think about the world. In terms of action, well, each of us has only so many 160 hours in a week, a pitiful little 30 years-ish of a scientific career. And, time is, art is long and time is fleeting, as said Longfellow. And boy, was he right. And so, one of the mechanisms that one can exploit is what Francois Jacob referred to as night science. So I just want to read the last paragraph, but you should go read this little article. We talked about the Lacaperon in the course, so this will be interesting from a scientific point of view. But I want to just focus on the last paragraph. Our breakthrough was the result of night science, a stumbling, wandering exploration of the natural world that relies on intuition as much as it does on the cold, orderly logic of day science. In today's vastly expanded scientific enterprise obsessed with impact factors and competition, we will need much more night science to unveil the many mysteries that remain about the workings of organisms. I can't add to that. So my next example of night science is kind of a more evil version of night science, but there's a beauty to it as well. And the evil is the foolishness of humans and their need to dominate each other and that kind of thing. And so in this case, I'm thinking about the wasteland of armies in Russia and how Napoleon tried to advance on Moscow, and one of his soldiers, a certain Jean-Victor Poncelet, was left for dead in the snow and was captured and was imprisoned. And as you can see in the upper right-hand side, this says preface to the first edition. This work is the result of researches that I undertook in the spring of 1813 in the prisons of Russia, deprived of all books and of support, above all distracted by the unhappiness of my country and my own unhappiness. I wasn't really able to do the justice to the subject that it really deserved. I mean, I'm translating it a little bit loosely. But nevertheless, what came out of this was his discoveries of some of the principal results of what's now known as projective geometry. And he had been a student at the École Polytechnique in Paris of Monge in particular, Gaspard Monge. And while he was imprisoned doing his night science, he basically was trying to reproduce what Monge had taught him about Euclidean geometry and so on. And in the act of creation, in the act of sitting and thinking, and I believe this so strongly because I've just seen it in action so many times for me and people I know, and through the history of science, that the act of doing the night science, trusting the process of night science, led to insights. So anyway, so that's Poncelet. He had his night science. And another example from mathematics is Andrew Wiles, who spent 8 years basically obsessing on Fermat's last theorem. This is a really great article, an interview with him that you could look up. And I'll just read the stuff to you. How did you begin looking for the proof? In my early teens, I tried to tackle a problem as I thought Fermat might have tried it. I reckoned that he wouldn't have known much more math than I knew as a teenager. Then when I reached college, I realized that many people had thought about the problem during the 18th and 19th centuries, and so I studied those methods. But I still wasn't getting anywhere. Then when I became a researcher, I decided that I should put the problem aside. It's not that I forgot about it, it was always there, but I realized so that's night science. But I realized that the only techniques we had to tackle it had been around for 130 years. It didn't seem that these techniques were really getting to the root of the problem. The problem with working on Fermat was that you could spend years getting nowhere. It's fine to work on any problem so long as it generates interesting mathematics along the way, even if you don't solve it at the end of the day. The definition of a good mathematical problem is the mathematics it generates rather than the problem itself. And so, just this last thing, he says, and now that, the interviewer says, and now that journey is over, there must be a certain sadness. There is a certain sense of sadness, but at the same time, there's this tremendous sense of achievement. There's also a sense of freedom. I was so obsessed by this problem that I was thinking about it all the time when I woke up in the morning, when I went to sleep at night, and that went on for 8 years. That's a long time to think about one thing. That particular odyssey is now over. My mind is now at rest. So, that's really all that I wanted to say. I just wanted to make a plug for the idea of night science, a plug for the idea that, part of your time is yours to keep and to do your science and not worry about what anyone else has to say, to pursue one's own curiosity. And, I learned some financial advice as a kid from this book called The Richest Man in Babylon. And there was a character in there named Arcad, and his theorem was a part of all you earn is yours to keep. The idea being that every month when you get paid, or every week or whatever, first thing you do is you put a certain amount of it aside, and you're paying yourself, and it's not to be touched ever. Period. That's the end of that. And at $83.33 a month, that's $1,000 per year. At 6% interest or something, you would have more than $1 million after 40 years. That's not the point. The point is a part of all you earn is yours to keep. Well, here my thought is that a part of all your time is yours to keep. A part of your time is your time. And so let's say that it's 1 day per week is devoted to night science. I don't see any problem with that. In other words, I would have to put my money where my mouth is. I'm saying that, if my own grad students do that, I will not be worried that they're not getting something done on their work. I'll actually be happy that they're doing that. So that's what I had to offer on this particular vignette.